This would be the equivalent of giving a 16-year-old keys for your Bugatti and telling them to be responsible. One of the other things that kind of sets kind of the early 1920s apart, especially the Bentley Motors story, is the fact that all of the drivers that had been driving, and even W. Bentley himself, had lived through World War I. Today, I think the only people who could probably emphasize with exactly how horrific that is are probably people living in Ukraine today. You know, a horrific period of time. Most of them saw lots of their friends die. W. Bentley returns from the war. His wife dies of typhoid fever. Various things happen, but they're all men of means in Britain. And being that they have a very stiff upper lip, you don't talk about it. You just get on with your life kind of attitude. And so that's what all of these guys did. They just kind of got on with it, got to their lives. But when you look at exactly how they lived and what they were doing, it's pretty clear all of them kind of had demons. You know, there are stories of Barnado's country house parties. The country house had a 2-mile driveway. There are stories of these guys getting wildly sloshed in the middle of the night and racing from the bottom of the driveway up to the top, which is not exactly behavior that people would see as normal today. But it kind of puts everything in context. It also puts everything in context of some of the risks that they would take. This is when there was no safety equipment. You were not strapped in the car. There was not a roll bar. There was not any of this. And these guys just didn't think anything of it and just got on with doing things that most people would probably go, that's not a good idea, and shy away from. This kind of behavior continues till basically they all retire or they move on to other things. Probably the only other thing that's kind of amazing with this is if you look at Wolf Barnado. Wolf Barnado enters back into the service in 1939 with the start of World War II. Musters back in. You look at pictures of the man in 1938, he's a retired professional athlete. Big shoulders on him, looks very good, very spry, very capable. After 6 years of war, the stress, he was a general. He's a shadow of his former self and actually passes away fairly early on in the 1950s. But he goes from kind of being a big professional playboy and professional athlete to being kind of a shriveled old man in 1950. It would be a very big part of creating one of those greatest racing dynasties of all time because you, one, had a group of people that had truly seen hell. When they came home, they were, one, grateful, I think, to just be alive. So if you look at the whole culture of the Roaring 20s, especially the culture of racing drivers, who most of them were men of significant means, they were partying like there was no tomorrow. And they were driving like there was no tomorrow. Sir Henry Birkin was lapping Brooklyn in late 1930, at over 130 miles an hour, which, to put it in perspective, the top speed of the average car was 50 miles an hour. So he was lapping way more than double. So if you look at that today, most production cars are capable of 120. That would be the equivalent of racing at over 300 miles an hour without a thought or care in the world. There's a famous video that's still available that you can find, sometimes digitally, of Birkin driving into the pits in his blower 4.5 single-seater. And he's standing on the seat, steering it, and running it with a hand throttle. And he looks completely calm, like, looks completely together. But it's like, why on earth is the guy standing on the seat, driving it in that position? Well, if you do a little research, you realize the car's on fire. The whole cockpit, under where his feet are, is ablaze. And he is just steering it calmly into the pits like there's nothing wrong. When in fact, the car's on fire. He didn't, bail out of the car. He didn't let the car crash. He sat there standing, driving it into the pits on, standing on the seat. Which, when you think about it, is a pretty a pretty wild mindset. But he also probably didn't want to pay Dorothy Paget for the car if he crashed it. It was an expensive piece of racing equipment. That just kind of gives you an idea of his mindset. If you look at the names that they were, Barnado, Benjerfield, Birkin, Clement, Kidston, all of those guys were kind of the pinnacles of high society. But the interesting thing is they weren't lords. They weren't members of the royal family. The British society it was at the time pretty much a caste system. But those guys were the people you wanted to hang out with in Great Britain in the 1920s in London. If you were partying with Wolf Barnado and Tim Birkin and Glenn Kidston, you were having a epic night. Because, like Wolf Barnado's budget, the equivalent of $10,000 a week on entertainment alone. So you name it, these guys were living rock star lifestyles. There's a gentleman by the name Rivers Fletcher who, has passed away, but he wrote some books. And one of them was Bentley's Past and Present, MG's Past and Present, because he worked for Bentley and he worked for MG. Rivers started working for Bentley Motors when he was 14 years old. And he tells a very entertaining story in his book where he was asked when he was about 16 or 17, 1928, 1929, that he was to fetch the chairman's 4.5 Bentley from a garage on one part of town from the work service department and take it to Wolf Barnado's house, which was on a very prestigious square in London that everyone in the 20s actually called it Bentley Square because all the drivers used to party there. So you'd always see the Bentleys parked in this square. So Rivers is asked to go take this car cross town to deliver it. This would be the equivalent of giving a 16-year-old keys for your Bugatti and telling them to be responsible. They're not going to be responsible. Rivers gets in a wreck on the way to Barnado, has to catch the bus to get to the square, and arrives at the house. Barnado's butler has him in and has to break the news that, by the way, he had crashed one of the chairman's cars. He was summoned up to the bedroom where Barnado at 10 o'clock in the morning was having breakfast in bed. And besides Barnado, as Rivers says, is a very, very good-looking, voluptuous blonde. And there, 16-year-old Rivers is forced to tell Barnado, as he is eating a poached egg, glaring him down, that he has wrecked his car. Apparently, toward the end of it, Barnado's face hardened, and he was about to really dig into Rivers. The blonde took pity on Rivers, put her hand on his shoulder, and Barnado looked over and dismissed him. That's part of the myth of those guys, the partying. Everything they were doing was kind of larger than life. But it also, can go forth to, Italy. You've got Tazio Nuvolari, you've got Caracciolo, you've got all these characters. But you are right. Bentley is kind of a rarity where you have drivers that are still known today. But I think that's partially their personalities were larger than life, and they were partying like there was no tomorrow. They'd lived through World War I. And that was something that I think all of them kind of, had it. It's an interesting time in history, but pray the world doesn't have to go through something as horrific as World War I to have that much of a good time again.
As dealership systems become more automated and more people sell their cars privately, it's harder and harder to find exactly the car that you're shopping for. But Auto Tempest is the most powerful way to shop for your next car because they compile the results from all the major listing sites into one place. Autotempest.com, all the cars, one search. They search nationally amongst all the major sites, but also allow you to search throughout the country at the same time for Facebook Marketplace results, Craigslist results, and things like that. So we love Auto Tempest because it's where I start most of my mornings, searching the deep dark corners of the internet to try to find my next bad automotive purchase. But you'll love them because it's the best way and the fastest way to find your next car. So check them out now at the link in the description below to find your next car on Auto Tempest.